مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. نحن في منتصف فصل الصيف حين يبدأ الحر الشديد في واشنطن يماثل شبه الجزيرة العربية، ويبدأ كثير من الناس في الإيمان بالظاهرة الاقتباس الحراري. غادر الرئيس والكونغرس ومعظم واشنطن البلدة في طريقهم إلى الشاطئ، الجبال أو أي مكان. لم تختفي مشكلات دولتنا، وإنما اختفى فقط الأشخاص المنتخبين لحلها. إذن هذه الفرصة مثالية للنعود فنلقي نظرة على الضيوف الرائعين الذين تشرفنا بصحبتهم في برنامج داخل واشنطن على مدار العام الفائت. داموا جمهوريين وديمقراطيين، صحفيين وسفراء، مسؤولين حاليين وسابقين من مختلف الفروع التنفيذية والتشريعية للحكومة. وفيما يلي بعض من أهم ما جاء على ألسنتهم. So Norm said earlier that Democrats may be running away from the president over the next several months. Do you see that this is happening, and do you see it happening with even greater ferocity as November gets closer?
We saw that happening in the last election. It's been a trend where some Democrats are not necessarily running away from the president, but trying to establish their own brand. And the president right now is not nearly as powerful, as charismatic, as popular as he was, where he could just land Air Force One in your district and sprinkle magic dust, and the people would all think you're doing a great job as a congressman or as a senator. The president has to work harder at it. He's still doing fine. He just did a big money fundraiser last night in Miami. He's able to pull in the big bucks, but in terms of exciting the electorate, the president is just not exciting those people at the base the way he used to. There are issues like climate change, like minimum wage, like immigration, where people had hoped the president would do a lot more during his first term, do a lot more at the very beginning of his second term, and the president is still treading water.
This, by the way, Rob, is one of the dilemmas that the president has, where foreign policy and domestic politics intervene. One of the things that the president could do, would be tempted to do, given the Europeans' dependence on Russian oil and gas, and given the fact that the Russian economy is pretty much in a shambles, but all they've got going for them is their oil and gas production and delivery, is to ramp up exploration and production of natural gas here in the United States. Now, you know, we can't get it over to Europe very quickly, but that signal would be a strong one. To do that, however, which means more fracking, would cause the environmental movement to react very strongly against him at just the worst possible time. So in some ways he has a real dilemma here as he looks at how we ramp up pressure against Russia and how that plays against domestic politics.
And what's your instinct? Do you think the president chooses tough abroad versus environmental green hero at home?
Environmental green hero at home has got to be his first choice. He can talk about being tough, but he just doesn't have the support here at home to get that done.
Are there stories, specific stories, that you think Americans need to know more about in terms of foreign affairs that general media is not adequately covering?
There are a lot of dangerous situations in the world that are not as well explored as they might be. For example, North Korea. There are no reporters in North Korea. We don't really know what Kim Jong-un is up to. All the intelligence that has been provided publicly so far has been off the mark. They're about to explode their fourth nuclear weapon, would they? They've been providing weapons to all sorts of folks that have the money. Would they provide nuclear weapons to the Osama bin Laden followers, for example, if they had the money? We don't know, and that's something that's really not being explored. And there are several other stories like that that could be better explored for the American public and the public of the world that are not being explored as well as they might be.
I did want to ask you, sir. You are the king of congressional dysfunction. Congress just
I'm the king of reporting on
king
congressional,
of reporting on congressional dysfunction.
predicting congressional
Now,
dysfunction.
Congress just did something totally unnatural. They reached a deal on the budget for the next 2 years, or a year and a half or so. How does it matter?
It matters in a couple of ways. One, it's a signal that you can actually find a compromise and get a leadership behind you. And it's also, I might say, brought a Republican establishment that has been too passive in the face of a radical wing pushing back against it, and they will get a victory out of this. It means that we are much less likely to have another set of psychodramas, shutdowns of the government, and threats for the next couple of years. But we have to keep in mind a couple of things. It's a very small and modest deal, and we're still going to have to write bills to keep the government functioning at dollar amounts that are going to mean serious cutbacks in important programs. Two, we have another vote on the debt limit coming up, probably in April or May. Now with a more robust economy, it might even be pushed to June, but probably April or May. The more radical forces on the Republican side are going to try and use that yet again as a way to pressure the president into giving them what they want, postponing Obamacare or other things. If we end up with another confrontation over the full faith and credit of the United States and a potential default, we'll be right back into people thinking that their expectations have been raised only to be dashed yet again on the rocks.
I think that the debt, defaulting on the debt is such a serious matter that they won't go over the cliff on that one. If they didn't go over the cliff on the budget, which is closing down the government is a much less serious eventuality than losing our credit rating. So I think they'll find a way to compromise their way out of that by kicking the can down the road. I mean, nothing in the way of permanent problems have been solved.
And during your 5 terms focused here in Congress on this set of issues, have you seen this become more or less of a partisan issue, the fight against terrorism?
There have been some political setbacks that may not. Yeah, certainly the Snowden example with the NSA. Now the NSA had broad bipartisan support, but now actually on both sides of the aisle, NSA needs to be reviewed, I think. We need to look at reforms to NSA, the way they're doing things. And that's brought some ire and has hurt the process with respect to cybersecurity legislation. And it's also caused, I know to your international community, a lot of angst about what is the NSA doing, who are they listening to. And I think world leaders have a right to know what is going on with that. NSA has been a very effective tool for us since 9/11 in terms of picking up signal intelligence from terrorists that want to commit and perpetrate acts of terrorism in the United States. I believe our intelligence community has been very effective as well. And our special forces have been very good. For instance, the raid on bin Laden and being able to bring him to justice once and for all was a major victory for our special forces. And I was actually in Pakistan right after that. Occurred a couple months after that raid on the compound took place. And it was interesting, inside Pakistan there was some, I would say, embarrassment, but also some resentment that we did that we invaded a sovereign nation. But from the American perspective, a person who killed 3,000 people, 3,000 Americans, needs to be brought to justice.
When you go back to your district and you talk about these issues, what's foremost on your constituents' agenda in terms of the fight against terrorism?
There's anxiety. There's a fear factor. I try to be responsible in the rhetoric. I think you can inflate all this and engage in hyperbole, and then you don't want to end up scaring everybody. I want to reassure them that we're doing everything we can to protect American lives, which is why you haven't seen a major event really since 9/11 on that scale. We've had a lot of successes. So they're concerned about that. They are concerned about the NSA listening to their phone calls. They're concerned about TSA at airports and the role that they play. There's always a privacy. Anytime we talk about security, you also have to weigh privacy issues as well. And it's a delicate balance between privacy and security. I think after 9/11, we were more willing to give up some privacy for that security. And now I think you're seeing the pendulum kind of going back towards the privacy route.
So Norm, let's just finish on our last discussion. Will it have to take another day after 9/11 for Americans to be unified in the pursuit of a national objective overseas?
First, Rob, let me offer a bit of a caveat to the idea that we all united with World War II. Because keep in mind, I'd mentioned the American First Movement, but as we led up to what was the galvanizing event, which was Pearl Harbor, there was enormous division in the country. One of the things that had to be done to prepare for entry into the war was to extend the draft, the selective service system. It barely passed in the House of Representatives. I mean, it was the most razor-thin margin. If we had not done that, we wouldn't have been prepared to go to war. So there was great division until we were attacked. We saw, of course, the country come together in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. But the divisions in the country, the political divisions, are so great now that if we had another 9/11 attack tomorrow, I fear that instead of having all 535 members of Congress gather on the steps of the Capitol the next day, as they did, to sing God Bless America, 200 of them would be back in their offices writing impeachment resolutions. So there's a little bit of a concern now that what used to work to unite the country, a crisis, may not work in quite the same way these days.
Well,
Yeah, I basically share that fear. I do think that presidential leadership has something to do with it, being able to rally the country, and I fear that for whatever reason that Barack Obama, I hope he's an aberration. I mean, I would like to think that the next president of the United States could somehow figure out how to ease this problem, because if we don't get the polarization problem in America solved, or at least tempered, so many things are going to go wrong in this country that we're going to lose our national leadership, worldwide leadership, to the extent that we have it left.
you spoke about Sunni-Shia divide. Let me talk about a different part of the Middle East where the divide is at least as deep, but in another arena. And that's in Egypt, where the divide between the Sunni group, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the non-Islamist part of society is deeper than ever before. The administration recently took an important step and issued a hold on significant aspects of American military assistance to Egypt. Why did it do it? Was it right to do it? Steve?
It was right to eventually get there. In my view, the real leverage that the United States has over the Egyptian command staff that have taken over Egypt in what I consider to be a coup are the deep human relationships, the joint training exercises that have happened for years, that General al-Sisi went to the National War College. We talk a lot about money, aid, and assistance, but it's really these human relationships that have mattered. And I think that the moment there was the coup, because you've got to ask the question, there are a lot of people that believe in civil society, women's rights, secularism in general inside Egypt, who were very frustrated with President Morsi's campaign, went to the streets. But when the generals instituted the change that they did in a highly violent way, that is not the methodology of democracy that America can actually just say, we're going to put a rubber stamp on it and say, that's great, guys. So I believe we should have suspended the military assistance that we suspended yesterday, or recently, then. And so I think it is the right thing to do, but with the notion of keeping it open, should they get back on track with an inclusive political equation.
Well, I thought you were the realist. You know, these guys are keeping peace, fighting terrorism, all that sort of thing.
I am a realist in the sense that if the Muslim Brotherhood and those young men who don't have jobs decide to choose violence rather than political participation as the way in which they express their hopes and desires in their government. As a realist, I worry about that. There are strategic consequences, not only inside Egypt, but throughout the region. It was vital to get the Muslim Brotherhood to believe in a political process. And you know, when Lindsey Graham and John McCain went over there, and Lindsey is a I consider a friend, but I sort of chastised him, you know, saying we need to convince those Muslim Brotherhood folks in the streets to go back to the ballot box. Why would they go back to the ballot box after what happened? So you need to create a credible plan that probably in the future will mean that Morsi won't be back, but a second tier of Muslim Brotherhood players will have to participate actively with other elements of Egyptian political world.
All right, Juan, what's your view?
I think we've cut off our nose to spite our face, because I think Steve's right. If we were going to do this, it should have been at the moment of the takeover or at the moment of the height of the use of violence to suppress the protests or the sit-ins. I think doing it now sends some very weird and mixed signals. And again, going back to this notion of a confused policy, we're sending very odd signals. We in some ways have supported the military takeover, have sort of sat by and been silent in terms of some of the oppression and what they've done with President Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the same time have tried to protest now with the cutoff of aid. And in many ways, the aid is an essential part of our leverage with the military. And what I find most problematic is not just the timing, but the lack of messaging. Why are we cutting off aid now? Is it because of the violence? Is it because of a lack of an electoral plan? Is it because we really are concluding this was a coup and the lawyers have now determined this? What is the message in terms of what we're trying to achieve by doing this? And I think to me, that is the most problematic part from an American foreign policy perspective.
Now, we've talked about Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower, traitor, whatever term you want to use, on the show before. And now there's a boomlet of support out there, fueled by an editorial in the New York Times, suggesting that Edward Snowden should be offered clemency, that what he did was to trigger a useful national conversation over secrecy and the National Security Agency. What's the politics here? And is there any chance this is going to happen?
There's no chance that it's going to happen. The Obama administration is dead set against Snowden, and justifiably so. He was given a position of trust and responsibility. He signed documents saying that he would respect secrecy. He had a top secret clearance and so on, and he violated it all. He broke laws. He endangered the national security. He ran off to China, one adversary of the United States, or at least rival of the United States, and then left there for Russia, and is pretending to be a great civil libertarian, and he's gone to authoritarian countries. He's also a hypocrite. So as far as I'm concerned, he should spend a lot of time in jail. On the other hand, it is true that he has triggered a useful conversation about privacy and secrecy and so on. I don't think it has come to the point of, which he says it is, of indicating that the government is listening to everybody's phone calls. It is keeping records of everybody's phone calls, but only the numbers that are called, and trying to match them up with suspicious terrorist suspects and so on. And it doesn't care about what you said to your family or your bosses or anything else. So now there's a question about its effectiveness in fighting terrorism. That's a legitimate issue. On the other hand, net, he's done terrible damage and he ought to be punished.
The ends don't justify the means in a case like this. There's some political pressure on Obama because every second-term president faces headaches from his own base. And the left is very upset with Obama, including over the NSA business, and now they're rallying behind Snowden. That's not going to be enough, Morta's right, to change things. I could see one possibility of a deal, and that is if Snowden can convince American officials that he has other information that's very damaging information that he will turn over to them and that will not be accessible to anybody else in return for a reduced prison sentence. And if he can prove that, they might consider a deal. I think it's very unlikely that it'll happen that way. And one of the things that is also working against him is the belief and the fear that going to Russia and to China, the idea that he's been able to withhold anything from them that he hasn't released otherwise is a pretty shaky one. So it's very likely that there's more damaging stuff there and that he's done more damage to America's national interest because of Russia and China.
Were you surprised that the paper of record, the reputable New York Times,
Not at all.
editorialized this?
Not at all.
No, you know, the Times on these issues especially is very much anchored over on the left.
The New York Times editorial page has lost all credibility. I mean, it has become the only useful thing about it. It's not interesting at all. Is to see what the knee-jerk left thinks. It rarely comes up with a new idea. I mean, this is a new idea, but it's a terrible one.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول الأفكار التي سمعتموها لحل مشكلات واشنطن، أرجو أن تتصلوا بي مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@elhura.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.